All right. Good morning, health coaching class. Turn the transcription off. That's weird. I'm Dr. Wagner. Welcome to our first live discussion. I'm the only one here, which is okay. Not everybody loves the live discussion format, but most people can't stand the discussion board, so I'm okay with it. And we were a smaller group this summer, so that's cool too. This is the first one. It was kind of fast given the start of the course. And frankly, I talk with myself all the time, so I can do this on my own as well. And then likewise, when you join or when you start interacting with my YouTube channel, you'll notice this conversation from previous semesters if it helps you to hear your voices about it, in addition to this time, which will just be me. Keep in mind, live discussions, you have 3 ways to earn your points. So you can show up and hang out just like you would in a typical in-person class where you might be sitting there paying attention, but not necessarily have anything you choose to contribute. You can absolutely join me with your camera on and your microphone on and have the conversation with your classmates and myself. Or you can just, as all of you are, view this recording, and then there'll be 2 questions at the end just to make sure that you actually listen to the recording. So any of those ways is fine. And you'll notice that I have them scheduled throughout the summer at different times on different days, hoping that I'll be able to touch base with a couple of you. So, and no worries if you said you'd be at one and you didn't make it. Don't worry, it's not like a hard standing commitment because, like I said, I'm happy to talk to myself. So, the first discussion for the course is what is health? And I think it's an important question that we need to clear up. What is it that we mean when we talk about health or health coaching in this specific case? As a health education specialist, I'm a master certified health education specialist and the coordinator for health education promotion. And both my master's degrees and my doctoral degrees are in that. And so oftentimes people are like, what exactly does that mean? In fact, I had a nurse practitioner the other day at my checkup say, a health educator? And I was like, oh gosh, sister, please. So what do we mean when we're talking about health? And I won't lie, I believe that my discipline owns a special portion of that. So throughout the course, you'll hear me talk about, or you'll see in the materials, me talk about sort of the medical profession. Sometimes I'll even call it the medical establishment, being different from what health education specialists do. And a health education specialist, in my opinion, is a specifically trained person in our discipline, usually in programs that are that meet the standards, the competencies, and the responsibilities as set out by the National Commission for Health Education Credentialing. So here again, though a lot of you may have had poor health educators, you might have had a health teacher or a person who was teaching you health in middle school or high school. Depending on where you come from, they might not have been appropriately licensed, and they might have even had the license but not been appropriately trained. So that's kind of part of the problem and a part of the reason why folks generally have not so great opinions of health education specialists. I'm biased, but I think we're amazing. I think the way that we view health is a little bit different and extremely important, especially as we navigate the world through our current pandemics, right? So the president chose to call off the COVID pandemic for the United States of America. One of my friends just texted me last night, tested positive for COVID. So yeah, COVID's not gone. Not sure that it's even not still a pandemic. The president of the United States doesn't really have the authority to determine the spread of COVID. But okay, there you have it. We also have issues still with violence, particularly of against BIPOC folks, so on and so forth, right? We could look at our mental health crisis. The Surgeon General just recently released a report on loneliness and looking at the negative effects of social media on the mental health of young people. So there's a lot going on, right? So health coaches really are in the space to help people utilize their own personal agency to empower folks to make the decisions in line with their values that are likely to contribute to better health outcomes, right? And generally, we think about things like life expectancy, and maybe even more so than life expectancy, because you can live a really long life. But as we learned from Healthy People 2000, we're really wanting to extend the years of healthy life. So that being a main agenda, right, of a health education specialist. So when we're talking about health, I think the number one thing that people do is they don't think about all the dimensions. And generally, I know in my stress course, I look at 8 different dimensions. As an undergrad, I was taught 11 different dimensions of health. And you'll see as you navigate through this early coursework that most people think prominently about physical health. We're starting to think a little bit more about mental health, which I've had students say, but if mental health is all in your brain, isn't that still physical health? And it kind of is, but the ways in which we think about our cognitive processing, our intellectualism, our ability to feel through and around emotions, especially when those get heavy. So sometimes people will actually break up mental health, emotional health, intellectual health, being 3 different dimensions or components of health. We also should pay some mind to our spiritual health, which is not about religion. It might be for some of us, but our spiritual health is more just about that connection that we feel to a purpose larger than ourselves. So that might be to a connection to the environment or to energy or to a higher power or to our community, however we actualize that. And we will look at that closer as we navigate through the semester. We could talk about occupational health, right, and financial health, which often goes along with that, at least for me. I would love to have finances without occupation, but I haven't quite figured that out yet. And frankly, I would do my job for free as long as my cost of living was provided for. Um, we could think about environmental health. We probably should be thinking about environmental health a little bit more than we are as Americans in terms of our air quality, our soil quality, our food quality, nature patterns or climate patterns, so on and so forth. So there's really a lot of different ways we can look at health. One thing that people often outside of the discipline will do is make an assumption that health is positive, right? And they talk about being healthy or wanting to improve our health. Health is not inherently negative or positive. It's simply, a measurement of how we're doing, how we're feeling, how we're living. Again, depending on which dimension specifically we're talking about. So a person can be in good health, we can be in mediocre health, we can be in poor health. Oftentimes, surveys are assessing our perception of our health. And what we'll find out very quickly, especially as health coaches, is that a person's perceptions might not actually equate to reality, right? I often use a color as an example. One might perceive my hair is what? I don't know, gray, silver, blonde, white. I mean, what color is it? It really doesn't matter what you perceive it to be. It is what it is. So whatever you choose to call it might make me feel differently about myself, might make you feel differently, given the language that you use, but it doesn't make anybody's perception of what it is right or wrong. As I said, some of them might be more accurate to my definition or less accurate. It might be a perception that if communicated to me has an effect, right? It could hurt my feelings or feel like a compliment, depending on what exactly it is that you're saying. But when we're working with an individual, we're going to start where their perceptions are, right? Do they perceive themselves as being healthy or not? Do they perceive themselves as needing more fitness or better nutrition or more sleep or more or less social interaction or more or less social media interaction, right? More or less spiritual navigation. Does someone want to get themselves back to a space where they have that connection, right? Or where they are nature bathing or meditating or joining prayer circles or religious text study or whatever, right? Whatever those things are. So we're always going to start with that person's perception. And as I said, our perception doesn't always meet reality. And we have language that we sometimes use casually that's really inappropriate, right? So oftentimes people will say, oh, I'm so OCD or I'm so whatever, right? I'm going to kill myself. Or we use language that is about things, right? Obsessive compulsive disorder is a diagnosis. So it's really not just that we like things neat or a certain way, it's that we actually have a difference in our brains that might line our cognitions and our interpretations up in a very specific way, right? A person, as I said, might view themselves as mentally healthy, but really have an underlying depression or anxiety that's undiagnosed, right? I mean, more than 25% of Americans with depression or anxiety will never get a diagnosis and will not seek the treatment that they need. It's not just because they're being obstinate, it might be because maybe even the fog of their mental health issues doesn't allow them to see that they're actually struggling, or they know that they're struggling, but they don't recognize that it's actually a, you know, electromagnetic issue in their brain, right? Because again, oftentimes we talk about, oh, I'm so depressed. And I'll often say, like, capital D depression is the diagnosis kind versus the lowercase d, which is a depression that we might feel because of a loss or a breakup or you know, whatever those things are that might affect us in that negative kind of way. So we're going to do a couple of things in the course. We're going to try to make sure that we're clarifying our language such that we're saying what we mean when we mean something, right? And then thinking about if a person wants to improve their health, how we might benefit from helping them see it from a holistic framework, right? So people often expect folks like me to be oppositional to all the fun stuff, right? So recreational beverages, right? Or drugs, or having a good time, right? Or eating badly, whatever that means. Right, those kinds of things. And so often a person who's wanting to seek help is going to inherently feel judged because they already know that they are carrying a little bit of extra weight or that their smoking cigarettes is perhaps not a healthy choice for them. But what we need to keep in mind is that all of our health behaviors offer us something, right? So they help us. I mean, why might a person smoke cigarettes? Right? We often will say, well, that starts usually because of peer pressure and then people get addicted. And some of that's true and some of that isn't, you know. You might not be aware that undergrads are among those populations of initiation. And often that nicotine use is a stimulant, right? Used to help sometimes deal with some undiagnosed other brain issues in which a stimulant could be helpful. Also, just because we recognize it. I mean, my morning beverage is now decaf because of the ways in which I started to sort of ascertain how caffeine was serving me and how it wasn't. And so sometimes I'll still order my giant iced decaf coffee with a side of espresso. And they'll say, you don't want that in there? And I'm like, no, because I dose myself with it purposefully because I know that overall caffeine was not serving my anxiety very well, right? It was giving me this sensation that was a little bit rough on other people and myself. And so I, over time, worked myself out of caffeine. I do miss that. I do find days where it's very difficult to feel like a functional adult without that jolt that it gave me. And so occasionally I will use that shot of espresso to say, okay, you're doing this purposefully. It's in its cute little cup. We're going to take this as we would any other dose of a medication or a substance or a drug or however you want to claim the name. And then recognize that there are going to be side effects, right? That there are going to be consequences. And there often are. I'll get that brain dose that I want that gives me that that I might find helpful in a small space. But then I'm recognizing that later I'm going to feel dehydrated and hungover, and that tomorrow I'm going to want to do it again, right? Because my brain is going to want to seek that homeostasis and is going to want that relationship to restart. And so intellectually, then I have to work to override my desire for the substance such that I can maintain the choice that I've made for myself, which is to not use caffeine in those ways, or at least not in the unconscious ways that I was years ago when I was really over consuming. And as I started the conversation, you know, recognized that it wasn't serving me. So a health coach is going to work really hard to hear where a person is coming from and what it is that they want to change. And here is where, even though you might just be here to learn some health coaching stuff because you want to be a physician's assistant, or you want to be a personal trainer, or you want to work in some other space, not perhaps as a health education specialist, but to still position yourself just as that coach, right? So not the person that makes the choice or prescribes for the other person, but that simply helps support with the framework that you're going to learn throughout the summer with me, to ask good questions that are helpful, right? But not judgy, to do that in ways that are informed by health behavior theory. So we've got hundreds of years of theory that informs why people make certain choices and why they don't make other choices, which we'll continue to talk about, or at least you'll continue to hear from me. And to see how that fits in with our larger health agenda, you'll notice that the coursework is still talking about Healthy People 2020, which is kind of gone. It's still around, as you can see, but we're really working on Healthy People 2030 now. And so I will continue to supplement what you're going through in the course. You might have read in the beginning information that I only teach this in the summer now. So sometimes it is a little clunky because it's been a whole year since I've been here focusing on the coursework. So I do have some updated pieces of Healthy People 2030 that I find to be really great. Frankly, I think 2030 is the closest health education document that we've ever had, and we've had these documents since 1979, so there's been a lot of iterations. And I like 2030 for two reasons. One, because it focuses much more on health literacy, which at the end of the day is really what health education specialists are wanting. So to raise individual and communities' ability to really know and understand their health. And then to also, health literacy also has to do with, interacting with medical professionals and thinking about medications and health decisions. And like I said, the planning as well as the consequences around those health decisions and making those choices for themselves that best fit in line with their values and aspirations and expectations for their lives, right? And we'll go through, I'll share with you, there are certain times it's kind of good. I'm okay now. Sometimes in the summer, I have these days where I've gotten a little bit too much sun, right? My spouse will say to me, well, you really need to be wearing sunscreen. You're going to get cancer. You're a health education specialist. You should know better. Okay, all of those things are true. I should be utilizing sunscreen. I know that intellectually. Not using sunscreen is elevating my risk for cancer. I recognize that. I also do get my yearly checks by the dermatologist, which are among my least favorite doctor's appointments and aren't going to prevent cancer, but are going to hopefully detect when I have issues. Does that make me a bad health educator? I don't think so, because again, I'm not telling anybody what is the only choice to make and how they should be living. Do I love a sunburn? No. There are consequences. Yes. Should I have know better as I'm approaching my 50th birthday? 100%. Have I also said, well, I got to die of something? Yeah, that's not terrible, or pardon me, that's not anything I'm terribly proud of. But I do usually say, though, I'm getting older and this reference is not that great, but the original Ghostbusters had a line where the demon said, choose your destructor, right? Meaning, tell me what you want to kill you. And then here shows up the Stove Puft Marshmallow Man, right? And they were like, what? That's all I could think of was the Stove Puft Marshmallow Man. Truth be told, that in America and cultures like ours, we do have enough privilege universally, not always as individuals, but collectively as a nation, that we generally are dying of chronic diseases, which essentially are the consequences of choices that we make, right? I mean, still heart disease, stroke, and cancer being our top three causes of death. Most of that is technically preventable, though you have to die of something, right? But which of those things are we going to die of? I question that as I approach my 50th birthday, which is actually not till next summer. This summer I'll turn 49, but I still feel like I'm approaching that. And eventually, sooner or later, I'm going to figure out what is the chronic disease that's likely going to kill me. Now, I say that as a privilege because I could also die of an accident or something not chronic disease related that then is going to change that course. We saw that with COVID, right? That for a couple of months in 2020, COVID was the leading cause of death. And for the year 2021, COVID became the second or third leading cause of death in the United States of America, again, depending on which population we as individuals actually are a part of. So that was definitely a difference. COVID was not a chronic disease, it was an infectious disease, right? And with major issues, hurricanes, pardon me, tornadoes, things like that, sometimes sanitary issues become one of those causes of death as well. Pardon me. And thinking about Hurricane Katrina specifically, pardon me, again, as an older reference, perhaps, but you know, New Orleans, for example, still had high issues of chronic illness. When Hurricane Katrina happened, though, very quickly there was emergency death situations from the actual what was happening with the storm. Then sanitary issues became an issue because the water had risen, the water was full of all kinds of issues with the rise in water. Then came the rise in the mosquitoes, which were carrying more of infectious disease, right? And it took a while before, I mean, frankly, parts of New Orleans are still trying to recover from Hurricane Katrina, but eventually New Orleans residents got back to, chronic disease and chronic illness being the leading causes of morbidity and mortality. So you'll see that in little pockets of developed nations. I don't know what's happening to me today. I'm sorry. But generally, chronic disease and chronic illness is what is killing most Americans. And I say that not to make individuals solely responsible for their health, because obviously we live in spaces where perhaps our access to nutritious and healthy foods is difficult, right? Or places where the social climate is dangerous, where there are shootings or murders or, violence that makes it very difficult to survive past a certain age. There are still genetic things that we're passing down, right? And then there are still all of the different behavioral pieces that go into this. So there's nothing that anyone can do really to guarantee that they're going to live a healthy, long life. But there definitely are choices that we can make that are perhaps better than other choices. Right. And so while I can rationalize that using nicotine is not the worst thing a person can do, and that there are ways a person might benefit and might choose to extend their use of nicotine longer, right, or to not quit or to maintain their use, there are definitely some health benefits to ceasing the use of nicotine. But again, if we neglect what the person was getting out of the use and don't make arrangements for those things to be supported by other things. Is that the right way to say it? Right. So let's say what part of my use of nicotine is to control my stress and my eating, right? My appetite. If I quit using the nicotine, how am I going to control my stress and how am I going to control my appetite, right? If I don't think of healthy ways in which to do that, that is going to set me up for relapse, essentially, right? And to probably, not to probably, but to more likely increase that my ending my relationship with nicotine is successful. I said that backwards. If we don't have the mechanism to support those things I needed from the nicotine, then the nicotine use is likely to come back. I guess I'll stop it there, right? So we have to think about that. But there are certain choices, like self-harm choices, right, that are generally problematic, not always, but things that we have to think about. So again, we're not going to oversimplify, right? But probably using methamphetamine is always a not so great choice, right? I mean, the consequences can be very extreme in terms of morbidity, mortality, legal issues, the damage it does to our brains and our teeth and our body systems. So there are definitely, fewer upsides to that choice than perhaps not getting enough sleep or using nicotine or caffeine or things of that nature. But we're not here to judge people's choices, nor to put people in order of like best choice to worst choice. We're simply here to provide support for people who are looking to make changes that are related to their health. And the second part of Healthy People 2030. So the first part was health literacy. The second is health and well-being, right? So thinking about not only our health, but also our well-being, which was, again, why I say it's a strong one for health education specialists. And by strong one, I mean iteration of the Healthy People agenda, because health and well-being is really where we are, right? Often folks will say, oh, wellness. I'm like, no, not wellness. Sorry, that one like sticks in me just a little bit, generally used by folks who are not actually in the discipline in the way that I am a little bit snobby about my discipline, right? But also looking at well-being, which is, again, how we're feeling, how we're living, how we're appreciating ourselves and our space. All right. So, like I said, I can talk to myself all day, but I'm noticing I'm at the 25-minute mark. Generally, these conversations will be 20 minutes, depending on who else is in the room and who's talking. And then we have that other time for other questions or things to talk about or to catch up with about the course. So hopefully I'll see some more of you at the next live discussion, but no judgment for me. I can keep having these by myself, no problem at all. And if you had signed up for today and forgot or just couldn't make it again, no worries. What happens now is everybody, because nobody showed up today, everybody will get a 0 on the live discussion for today. But then I will also, once the recording is downloaded, set up the 2 questions that you have to answer. And then I assign that to anybody that wasn't here, which today is everybody. And so you'll just notice that little change, right? That you won't have gotten the credit for being here, but you will get the credit as soon as you answer those 2 questions at the end of watching the video for today. Not that watching it is anything, because it's just my head bobbing around. Though I guess I was referring to my hair color. I don't know. Anyway, so listening to the conversation / watching and then answering those 2 questions. All right. So I'm here every day. This week I will be working from home on Wednesday. My air conditioner needs replaced, so that's an all-day job. And my dog is a little funny about people being in the house. So I will be at home for that. But otherwise, I'm here. I've already caught up with my grading for this morning, and I will continue to be responsive to your questions and concerns and any issues that you have with the assignments. All right, so I'm going to end the recording and then go download it and set up the next part. I hope you're having a great Monday, though it's a little chilly and overcast. I'm happy for the rain. The strawberries were a little behind. The sweet corn is a little behind, and I need my summer food. It's the one reason, well, not, it's among the reasons that staying in Ohio has been tolerable. All right, that's all I'll say about that. I'll talk to you again soon. Hope to see more of your faces next time. Take care.